Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Sloan the Record, recording on January 2nd, 2025, releasing on January 5th. My name is Nathan Sloan. I'm joined by my father, Ron. Each week we're going to go on the record about family history, past and present. Along the way, we'll see if we can't learn more about the people, traditions, values, and stories that made us, and open a window for everyone else to see a little slice of life in rural North Carolina. New episodes are published every Sunday, so we welcome you to join us on the journey. You can make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Podbean, or the podcast service of your choice. So welcome, and Dad, say hello.
Hello.
It's been just a few days since we did the last episode on Eldon Sloan Part 1. Not a whole lot has happened because we recorded that episode a little bit later, and then now we're recording this one a little bit earlier than last week, so maybe a little sparse on the details for our what's new with us and entertainment recommendations, but we'll make do. Anything new happened lately?
Nothing.
Well, new things happen. Anything interesting happened lately?
Nothing beyond the turn of the year.
That's true. New Year's. So another year goes by. 2024 in the books.
I'm in the third quarter. Past the third quarter.
Of what?
Well, if you look at it, 75, looking at 100.
Oh, that's right. Getting to 100.
Yeah, the years I've been here since 50.
1950. Cool. Well, we'll jump right in so that we don't waste any time getting into today's topic, which is Eldon Sloan Part 2. Now, just to recap, last episode, you talked a good bit about what he had told you about his childhood and also, some of his faith, how that was rooted, where that came from, the whole Truett name and everything. So this time, we're going to move from stuff that began before you were born into the era that you can remember. And so that's exciting for me. And we want to start with the real reason why you're here, which is his courtship with Grandma. So what do you know about him and Grandma and how they came to be?
Not a great deal, but I do know one part of the story which kind of startled me when I was told it, and that was their first date. My mom worked in the ASC office in Lillington, and my dad had a date with one of her coworkers and came by work to pick up this other girl, and he saw my mother there and asked the other girl who she was and commented favorably on my mother, which did not go over real well with the other girl. But as you can imagine, but he came back and called on my mother there, which I imagine was a little awkward.
Well, it doesn't sound like the first date would go very well with that other girl.
No, I doubt it did. And but anyway, he came back and to the office there, I guess not having phones and such. Then you called on people to see if you could go out with them, and didn't call them, you called on them. You come by to see them or write them, but he came back by the office, and so from that I know that their first date, they went to Pullen Park in Raleigh.
Okay, I've been there.
And they rode the merry-go-round, the same one that's still there.
Did they have a little train there at that time?
Yes, had a little train. It's a much smaller train. It was one like the ones you and I rode up there in Apex that time that you sat on top of the cars. It was that type of train up until probably the 60s, and then they went to a larger train that you actually got on board.
Mm-hmm.
But
so I guess that date at Pullen Park must have gone pretty well.
Yeah, I guess so. Plus, Dad was a salesman.
I was going to say with that intro with the first lady and either he was putting his foot in his mouth or he was actually genius and just recognized what he wanted right off the bat. Yeah.
It's funny to think about it that way. A genius. Oh, me.
So they go on the first date. Do you have any other stories from before they were before they were married or when they got married?
That's the only one I recall now. Just that in the Pullen Park story.
Do you get a sense from what you knew of Granddad? I know that you yourself were very self-deprecating when you talked about your younger years with girls and being awkward and everything. Mm-hmm. And I certainly feel that way about myself when I was younger. Do you get a sense that maybe that's a 3-generation thing and that maybe he was that way a little bit too?
I would say that was a safe bet, I was like, would I have done that? And I thought, I don't believe I would have even done that. Wow, who is she?
Yeah.
What's her name? Is she dating anybody? Oh, yeah. Mercy.
Well, they didn't have online dating and even phones that they could call each other easily. So I guess you had to act quickly when you saw something. You couldn't waste an opportunity. I
remember that famous bookcase that had all the books in it, seeing the How to Win Friends and Influence People in there one time. That may have motivated that purchase.
It's a very popular book. It's one of the most famous best-selling books of the 20th century. So, and a good book for a salesman to have too. So I'll give him credit on that.
Yeah.
Well, they did get married eventually. What was the age gap? You said something like 5-6 years.
I think it was 5 years, 14 and 19.
Okay, so
he was born 1914. She was born 1919.
And I can remember seeing a picture of them from their wedding somewhere. Do you know the one that I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so in that picture, somebody told me that he was like 30 or 30. Do you recall if that's ballpark accurate at least?
That sounds about right, yeah.
So that's about the same time that I got married.
Mm-hmm.
That same age range. So that's neat. What do you recall about their dynamic, I guess? Did it change over time? All relationships kind of change over time, but just from what you saw between them, were they, talkative to each other? How were their personalities similar, different? What kind of relationship did they have?
Kind of reminded me of the Christmas Story. You could see they had their own different. Do you remember the mom and the husband, Gavin? What was his name that played the dad? And he sort of had his own world, but they certainly overlapped in things. But like the way she was more kid centered to look after the kids and take care of them and even handle the discipline. She was. I dreaded Mom coming after me because she would go get what she called a keen hickory. And I can still see her taking that thing by the tip and stripping the leaves off with one move and snapping the tip off. And I knew it was not going to be fun after that. But Dad, I would have to fake crying when he would get me because it was, I would get tickled at him, he'd be like, now Daddy loves you and he hates to do this, but you've got to learn to obey. And he'd take his belt and let it kind of fall on your leg. And I would get, how it is when you don't want to laugh and it makes you want to laugh worse. Uh-huh. And here he was sounding, talking like he was doing something terrible. And I would I'd be like, I'd try to make the laugh sound like it was a cry. And, but with Mother, I did not have to fake it. She'd get you by the left hand and get you going counterclockwise in a circle, and that switch just going back and forth, and it would get both calves of your legs.
Well, you know, I've heard you tell that story before about the pitiful spankings that he gave. But I wonder if, looking back on it now, I mean, as a kid, you always think you were clever and like, oh, I covered up my laughs and he thought I was crying. Do you think that he like knew it though? Like he just didn't have it in him to be violent?
Yeah, he was probably the most tender-hearted person I ever knew. He had such empathy for other people and sympathy for them. I think he just couldn't bring himself to inflict real pain on somebody, you know. And tell you the truth, I love that about him. That he was that way. I mean, not just for the fact that his spankings didn't hurt, but you know, they were still effective. Because he was the kind of guy you didn't want to disappoint him. And I think that was as big a deterrent as a beating to me, was just not wanting to disappoint.
What do you think it is about his personality that made you not want to disappoint him?
I don't know. I don't know if it was something with his personality. It was just the fact, you know, he was my dad, but probably the fact that I looked up to him, and I saw respect that people showed him whenever he took me anywhere, and you know, being with him was like an immediate stamp of approval. And it was that way all through my life. Anywhere I went with him, I was immediately accepted, and
by other people that just knew him.
Yeah, yeah, especially older men, men that were his age and so forth. They immediately acted like they liked me, and made me feel good around them. And I think it was that. I think it affected me in terms of my behavior and so forth, because each of those people, the men at our church and the people that were friends of his, I didn't want to do anything to change their mind. I didn't want anything to happen that would disappoint them in me either. It was sort of like it carried on. And, the people like Harrington Morrison and Leo Quinn and Curtis Parker and Rex Thomas and Neil Thomas, a lot of whom were fathers of my friends, but they were all strong leaders in our community and in our church, and highly respected. And most of them were farmers, and farming was a respected profession.
Yeah. And I just wonder if, like, when you say somebody is easy to respect, I think in terms of like a management, even not outside of family, but like at work, like a management type situation, you have, the boss that rules with an iron fist because they're a boss, but you have the boss that leads by example and that gets in the trenches with you and does the kind of sacrificial things to make your life better. Those tend to be the bosses that get the most work and the best work out of their employees, supposedly. I've not been a manager in that role before, but I wondered if, there was any element of that to his personality.
Yeah, I think there probably was. I didn't see him in a role as a boss because of his, he worked for the post office department. He didn't become his own boss till he went into real estate.
You didn't see him as a boss of the family either.
Well, no, it was he and Mom were pretty much a team on that, and Mom was like I said, the disciplinarian. But he called the shots on getting work done, and he gave me my list of what I had to do. When I got home from school and what we had to do on Saturdays and so forth, and several things played into, wanting to get that done. When I was a teenager, it was a motivation of if I didn't get my work done, I didn't get anything like a car to drive, to go somewhere, or I didn't get to leave to go to the movies with David or Brown or something like that, And
you mentioned a list. This is going to seem like a weird detail, but I've recently gotten into using a fountain pen, as you know, and I've known for all time, that there are certain pens and pencils that you prefer. Like you like the little clip pens that have the caps that come off of them and have a little felt tip, fine tip to them. Was there a type of pen or pencil or stationery that he preferred? I don't know, like he worked for the post office. Maybe he had some kind of preferences.
No, it's kind of interesting you saying he worked for the post office. Most of his lists were made on the back of a number 10 envelope that was used. Something that was opened, where a mail had come in, a bill or whatever it was. He didn't throw the envelopes away. He saved those in a little stack.
That was a Post-it note.
Yeah. Funny. But he wasn't, usually when he was making the list of things I needed to do on a Saturday, he carried the route on Saturdays most of the time I was at home. And he didn't feel like he had done his responsibility until he had filled up the entire back of that number 10 envelope, and he turned it up vertically and started at the top, short notes, feed the cows, water the cows, the weeds out of the garden, pick the cucumbers.
Was he a box ticker, or did he strike things out? Do you remember? I always draw little boxes next to my list items and then check them.
Check them.
Yeah. But I think most people probably just write it out and then just strike things out. Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to do that, to strike them out.
Do you have any personal observations about thinking? I'll preface this by saying, thinking about myself becoming a father and wanting to gain as much wisdom as I can. Do you have any personal observations about his strengths or weaknesses as a father? And did any of that impact the way you tried to raise a family?
Well, I remember I had a good friend, Jerry Durham, at my church. And I asked him one time, because he had 2 sons and they were like model citizens, just did really well. And I asked him one time, "What's your secret?" And he said, "Be firm, be fair, and be consistent." And I thought about that when he told me that was a pretty apt description of my dad and the way that he did things. He was firm about his opinions on things. He wasn't wishy-washy about what we could do or not do. And he had things he expected of us. And he was fair, and he was consistent. So I thought, well, he at least, he had that down. And I remember that about him, and I knew he was very consistent in his temperament and his mannerisms. Very slow to anger. I don't think I ever really saw him angry many times. Never heard him use any bad language at all. And I think the worst I ever heard him use was rat turds. And we were in the grain bin, and he saw signs of rats being in there, and he got upset about it because he was a certified seed grower. And if they tested the stuff and found things like that, and he was upset that rodents had gotten inside that grain bin, and exclaimed about seeing those, and I was in shock.
Not rat turds.
Yeah. the T blank blank D word. But that's just, and he never used slang language either. Isn't that weird?
You mean like what kind of slang?
Well, like darn, exclamations like that. And, how a lot of people now will throw out freaking and different things like that. There's been slang at different times that changed, which is a lot of times substitute for other words. He didn't use...
But not even like old-timey slang, like lily-livered or...
No, he was a real respecter of the English language. And he would consistently corrected us if we said something wrong or, used the wrong word somewhere or something like that. And I remember thinking like, well, you knew what I meant, but he did that. And, I would say that's a fair assessment that he had a real respect for the language and for communications and the importance of tone of voice. He was very, he disciplined us about, tone of voice and saying things like we had an ill intent to them or were angry or whatever.
So did any of that carry over, do you think, into, I never heard foul language really from you guys. If I did a few times, it was, ooh, I knew you were really angry. So I assume that kind of thing did carry over to an extent. But I'm curious, do you see any things in my personality that remind you of him?
Yes, I see a lot of those same things I was just talking about. I told somebody one day that you remind me, and I catch myself sometimes even at the office, that if you're in there, it's sort of like having Dad in there. I don't want to disappoint you, like I was with Dad. I don't want to say I've got that kind of respect for the way you are, and I think I've told a lot of people that you turned out better than me with so many things in terms of I feel like your integrity and your the way you conduct yourself and like I said, your language, and I've thought of many times that was like Dad, and having you there kind of kept me watching myself. Much like I would have if he were there. I didn't want to disappoint him. I don't want to disappoint you.
If that makes interesting.
If that makes sense.
It doesn't make sense, but I understand what you're saying. But yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that. So, well, that's cool to know that there's anything about me that carries over from him. That's always neat to see those things. And I know that we're all like a woven tapestry of the different people that came before us. So I'm sure there's stuff that skips a generation and stuff that carries on that I didn't get and all that kind of stuff. Moving on to a little different question. I know that he made a very definite, strong impression on you because there have been many, many times in my life where I've heard you say something and preface it with, my dad always told me, or Dad always said, a lie's like a dog in a ditch, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So, is there anything else like that, or what are some of the things that he told you that you think you will carry with you for the rest of your life still today?
Well, one of the things that he told me that was similar to what you just said was, he said, you'll always know where the truth is, but if you tell a lie, you never know where that is and when it's going to pop back up. And he's used that thing about a lie's like a dog in the ditch. It's down there, and at some point it's going to jump out and chase you. But you just don't ever know when it will. But if you tell the truth, you won't ever have anything to worry about. He would tell me things like that.
Which is I guess it's a perfect saying for a postal carrier to worry about dogs in ditches.
Yeah. Yeah, because he had enough of them chase his car, too, and he had to worry about running over them, Mm-hmm. You didn't want to run over a family's pet. But there were different things. They weren't, they weren't always like sayings or anything that anybody would pick up. It was just the way he would explain things to me. And I think a lot of people in your life have those things. I remember my Uncle Mike, when commented to him, Eldon and I were with him up in Walnut Cove, and everywhere we went, everybody knew him and spoke to him. And of course, he was the Baptist minister in the little town. And, I understand that now. But Eldon, I think it was, said, Uncle Mike, you sure do have a lot of friends. And he said, well, I'll tell you, son, make a friend every time you get a chance and never lose one if you can help it. And that always stuck with me. It came from a different relative, but that always stuck with me. And that he saw friends as treasures. And
was that one of his brothers?
No, that was my mother's brother, actually.
Okay.
McRae Johnson. He's a whole, Uncle Mike would be a whole evening.
Yeah,
talking
good
about
subject
him.
there.
He was amazing. But Dad was just a straight up guy, and people respected him for that, and appreciated that about him. That behavior of people around him was much like if they were around a minister. They showed that same respect for him, and I think it was because of those qualities and those things that I observed as a kid about him, and probably a little bit of people, didn't they didn't want to disappoint him either. He was just a good guy. I mean, he wasn't one to get out and play ball with you and stuff like that a whole lot. I don't think he ever played much as a kid and was familiar with it. But you were asking about the dynamics when he and Mom. She's the one that worked with me the most on riding a bike, and taught me how to ride a bike. Dad was not as much for the playful side of things as Mom was.
He was the to-do list guy.
Yep, exactly. He was the to-do list guy. And he measured his day by what he ticked off that list, what he accomplished and what he got done, and meeting his obligations, whether it be to be at a church meeting at 7 o'clock or the Lions Club or whatever like that. He took those responsibilities seriously. And if he committed to something, he did that.
Well, you talk about a good day is getting the list done. Do you remember any habits that he had, small or large, just things that he would do during the day, like, a favorite TV show or sitting down to have a certain drink at night before he goes to bed, or any little detail like that would be like every day Dad does this?
Oh yeah, there were several things that you could count on, and things I recall is a certain time of night. You got to shower and put on pajamas and a robe and put on slippers, like bedroom shoes. And he didn't pick up his feet when they had those on. I guess he was like me, that they always seemed to fall off, and he would slide his feet along the floor. And they used to drive me a little bit nuts. He'd get up during the night and shuffle down the hall, to the kitchen, where he would make himself a glass of Ovaltine.
Oh, man. There's another way that we're similar, because I can destroy some Ovaltine. And usually it's late at night, like at 10 o'clock or 10:30.
Yeah, he would get up and go in there. And for all we went through to not wake him up after he went to bed, because he went to bed a lot earlier than us, and, we were always so careful that when he got up during the night to go get his Ovaltine, there was none of that on his part. He would stir his Ovaltine with the spoon turned edgeways, and I kept waiting to get up, hear the glass come apart, because it was clack, 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 as it was hitting the glass. And he would go through this little rhythm every time. It would be like clack, 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 clack. Clack, 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 and all right, he's got one more round of that, and here it comes. He's like, I will not be able to go back to sleep till he gets through that. And he would stir that dang Ovaltine forever.
You knew that it was well blended.
Yes. And then, put the glass in the sink and run it full of water. And it sounded like he had a microphone in there with him the whole time. And, but I guess that's another one of those things where I related to a Christmas story, was that Ovaltine played
Remember
a big
to drink
role
your
in it.
Ovaltine. Yeah.
Yeah. And I bought at an antique store a few years ago. I found this thing, we didn't have one, but it was a little beaker-like thing for measuring your Ovaltine, for making 8 ounces, making 16 ounces, making a quart or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it came with a spoon to stir it. I thought, well, Dad could have made good use of one of these if he'd had it back in the day. But he had that. The one thing that I loved, and I was just sure that I would stick with this. I guess it was more successful for him because we didn't have a TV at home. So he didn't have a favorite TV show. He thought a television was a huge waste of time, and quite often referred to it after we did get one as the curse, and which was the most uncool thing in the world to me, that he would refer to that way in front of my friends and other people.
Well, hold on. I want to go on the record here with you and point out something that you used to say, which was you hated text messaging. Mm-hmm. You would go off on, why on earth would you just pick up a phone and click to text people when you could just press a button and call them and say what you need to say and hang up. And how the tables have turned. You text now just as much as anyone else.
Yeah, that's because my kids won't answer the phone.
Oh, that's what it is.
So if I'm going to talk to them, I have to text them. No, I have come where text really, I was just appalled at it, was when you had to sit there and click 4 times for a M and 3 times for an M on a thing and 4 times for a N and such like that. And it was like, but by the time you say,
felt
how
like
are
you were
you
doing Morse code.
Yeah, exactly. Do you remember when it was that way?
Yeah, it was like maybe 4 or 5 years that text messaging was like that before we got full keyboards and then the on-screen keyboards that came with iPhones and Android and all that. So, but I have to imagine that he may have called the television a curse to start with, but maybe as time went on, he enjoyed watching some things.
Yes. Mm-hmm. He enjoyed watching the Carol Burnett show with Mother. That was one of their favorites. One thing he really enjoyed were travel logs. It would be like something you'd see on the Discovery Channel now, where a filmmaker would go to Africa on a safari or whatever, and they would record and put together their trip. So it was like being there to watch one of these travel logs. And they'd come around and rent venues like Memorial Auditorium, and they would show this, 35 millimeter film they had put together, and they'd show it in sections, and they'd be up on stage talking about it and setting up the next section. And my dad loved those things. And a lot of times, even when I was in college, he would say, try to be home by this time because I want us to go to a travelogue up in Raleigh when you get home. I'd love for you to see this one. And, some of them, like I said, were wildlife things and seeing things you had never seen. And some of them were like touring a country and, going on a train or something like that. And, they were narrated the whole time, but part of the time it was live narration. Some of it may have been live narration during the whole thing, as far as I know, because I just heard the voice. I didn't know where it was coming
That's interesting.
from.
And another thing that I did when I was studying film at UNC, you just hit your mic stand, by the
Sure.
way. Another thing that is interesting there is I studied with a concentration in there's not like a legitimate concentration, but I went to several specific classes that I could choose for documentary filmmaking when I was studying film at Wilmington. And I've always considered documentary film to be probably my favorite genre. So that's just another little interesting little tidbit there, that he was into documentary film all the way back then.
Yeah, and he was a lot like you in that he really enjoyed people one-on-one more than being, I think
I'm a party
sort of
animal. I don't know what you're talking about.
But he enjoyed that time talking to somebody that was interested about something and not having distractions, and not having somebody else, come in and, ask something or interject something. He'd like to get you off to himself instead of talking, in a group about a subject or something. But he did love those, and there's no telling how many we went to.
Did he have any hobbies? Or was he just all work, no fun all the time?
Well, sometimes it seemed to me he was that way, but it's not really true. I remember one time he loved to fish, but work always, would bump out the fish, and if we didn't get the work done, we didn't go fishing. But when he went fishing, he really enjoyed fishing. And one time when I was probably about 12, and Eldon would have been about 15. He took our preacher, Walter Gentry, and Eldon and I down to Morehead City and chartered a boat to go fishing offshore at Captain Otis's Lucky 7 fishing fleet. I guess he had 7 boats. And we went out. I was having a grand time, but it was almost the end of my brother. I've never seen anybody get so sick in my life as he got.
I feel the pain. I've been on fishing trips on boats and gotten quite seasick. It is not a good place to be.
And I did not know a human being could turn green. You know how even the little emojis, they've got some of them like where you're sick and you're green.
Right.
Instead of being little yellow faces, they're green faces. Well, he literally turned green. I got concerned because he had disappeared and was asking Dad about him. And Dad and Mr. Gentry were catching fish. And Dad, as I mentioned before, he liked to focus in one thing. He didn't like a lot of diversion. And he kept kind of brushing me off. And I went, into the boat and asked the captain where he was. And he pointed to this little door off to the side and with some steps going down in there. And I went down there and there was a kind of like a tube sticking up out of the floor with a toilet seat on it. And Eldon was laying on the floor hugging this thing, just holding on to it. and it was not a really clean looking thing. I was kind of horrified just to see that he was in that close of contact. And I went back up top deck and told Dad I thought he was dying. And Dad did finally go down there and check on him and got him some water. And but I think he had emptied out anything that was in his body that could come out. And he came back up on the deck, but he lay down. He didn't try to fish or do anything. But
something that you just said made an interesting realization to me. I wonder if it's true. You said you went down and saw Eldon, which is your brother, sick, and then I went up to see Dad. So I guess if you decide to name your son after yourself, you eventually just cease to be that person and you become Dad, and then your son takes your name. Because I imagine in your household, everybody would have referred to Eldon Sr. just as Dad.
Yeah, Daddy, yeah.
So it was Dad and Eldon. So you're in a way, you're literally passing the name down because you're going to get a new name anyway.
Yeah,
and here's somebody else that has my name.
Yeah, that's right. I had never thought of it that way, but they became to each other honey.
Honey.
Yeah, he would call her honey. Honey, do
Oh,
this.
yeah.
And we called her mom, so she kind of lost hers,
Yeah.
And I forget what she called him. But if either of them were angry at Eldon, he was Eldon Jr.
Yes, you got the junior if you were in trouble, I imagine.
And if I heard Truett come in behind my name,
That's right.
I knew it was fixing to happen. The switch was coming out or something. And but Eldon swore. He said he promised God that if he got him back to land alive, that he would never get on another boat. And I think he has lived that promise out. I don't, to my knowledge, he hasn't gotten on a boat until we went to Italy.
Okay, well, we got a few minutes left, so obviously we cannot cover everything about your dad in one episode. I'm sure he will figure in some of the conversations that we have in future episodes, though. But earlier I asked you in what ways I was like him, and we're going to be talking about Grandma in the next episode, maybe 2 episodes for her as well. And I'm sure, there are ways that you see yourself in both of them. So I want to ask, what ways do you think you are like him?
I think in temperament, I'm like him. I think in the fact that I love people and relationships mean a whole lot to me is like him, because as I mentioned earlier, in one of the things, he always had time for people. Even if he was in a rush with me and didn't have time, I could sense that he didn't have time for me on something because he had to get something done. If somebody else came up, they would never know that he was in a bind. He would just put them first on things in terms of stuff like that. And I catch myself sometimes realizing that I do those things too, and sort of feel like, well, I'd rather have this time with him right now and then stay after work a little later and catch up than to brush them off. I think I see little things every now and then. The thing I mentioned before that I don't think I finished that, but that he did that I thought I would do and didn't do was he would gather us around his chair every night and read the Bible to us. And, we didn't have a TV. If you got there early, you got an arm on the chair. If not, you sit on the floor in front of him or whatever, and he would read it, and then he would ask us questions about it or let us ask questions and try to explain things to us. And I could never be consistent with that, but he was extremely consistent with it. And I've realized a lot of my knowledge of the Bible today comes from that and that time he spent every night. And I don't know if he followed anything or if he just picked random things, to stay on. But he'd stay on the theme till he finished it up or a section of scripture, and then he'd go to something else. And that was one of the things where I wanted to be like him, and I didn't quite pull it off. I guess I hadn't put any thought into that, being prepared for that question, but I don't know. I don't know if you knew him well enough to say, well, I see something, or could tell me something you saw like him.
No, I think you hit the things that I was going to mention, which primarily was when you said anywhere that you go, if people knew that you were his son, they would give you a pass, or they would say, hey, I like you, or whatever. I mean, that I could echo the same sentiment. I mean, I certainly don't think that my recollection of Granddad is that he was as talkative as you can be to people that you run across, but you certainly have built a reputation with those that you are close to, those that know you well, that get beyond the superficial talking phase. Many of those people have a degree of appreciation for the time that you take with them and getting to know them personally, and listening to their stories and sharing your stories with them. And they tell me as much, even when you're not around. So that kind of thing, I was like, oh, well, that's one way that it's interesting that he sees that in Granddaddy, because I see that in him. And you kind of covered that as well.
That's interesting.
So, well, that's probably going to wrap things up for this episode. Next episode will be on, was it Margaret Excel?
Mm-hmm.
Margaret Excel, Johnson Sloan.
I'll try to remember to tell you about her name.
Yeah, we'll have that, and we'll cover that as well. Any in the last 2-3 weeks, anything you've seen, read, heard, done that you'd say is an entertainment recommendation, or just a fun memory? If not, you can just say pass.
Not really had anything since the last one we talked about.
Yeah, it's not been too long, so we'll give you a pass on that. The one thing that I have, Emily, another present she gave me was a very nice journal. And since we're entering into a new year, I decided yesterday, January 1st, I was going to start my first journal entry. And I've had different periods of my life where I've stuck to journaling and done a pretty good job with it. 2021 and 2022, I did a pretty good job with it. 23 and 24, I fell off. So trying to New Year's resolution, pick that up and continue journaling, because it's just it's fun, and sometimes it helps me when I write things out, organize my thoughts, and understand why I think or feel the ways that I think or feel. So
well, that's something I would strongly recommend that you do with this baby coming, because the memories are so intense when they happen that you think, well, I won't ever forget this. I'll be able to, talk about this. The little special things that happen, and knowing when things happened. If you keep a journal, you can go back to it. And I wish so much. I know I was with Jimmy Parker's mother one time, not too long before she passed away, and she was 103. And we used to go out to her house at least once a week, have dinner with her. She'd call and say, y'all come out and eat with me. I'm cooking fish. And the kids she interacted with, Elizabeth and Melissa, who you had not come along at that time. And
the dark ages.
Yes, as the girls refer to it, I'm sure. But Miss Parker was sitting there laughing with me and had me laughing, telling all these things that the girls had done and the things they had said when they were out there with her at the house. And there were things that immediately came back to me, but I would have never recalled them. Mm-hmm. And it made me wish I had written down all these things, but I just knew I had a good memory, and I just knew they'd never slip by me. But that was the first time I realized that so much had slipped by me. And here this 103-year-old lady remembered them in detail. And they'll be some of the sweetest times of your life, and the sweetest things and the funniest things. And to be able to go back to them, or for them to even go back and read, for your son to go back and be able to read the journal of what was going on, would be amazing. So I encourage you to do that, especially the funny things.
Yeah. And when you're journaling, you're always thinking, is this even worth writing down? I try to journal not with the mindset that it's ever going to matter or be important, because if you do that, then you worry too much about, I can only put important things in my journal, because when I'm dead and gone, someone's going to dig this up and read it. Probably not. Probably no one is going to dig it. Even relatives, if you've got 30 years of journals, they're probably not going to read your 30 years of journals. So you're safe from having to make everything perfect. Instead, just write what sticks out to you. That's my philosophy. I'm sure People have different ones. And I do have journals from 20 years ago when I was a teenager or right out of college. And, I'll go back and read those. And just like you said, I'll see something that I never would remember had I not had my journal. But once I read it, I remember, oh, yeah, that is that person's name, or that was this, it just comes back to you. And that's, it's kind of neat to have that locked away. So
yeah, don't make it like a log trying to put down everything that happened, but write down those things that are especially funny or especially sweet to you, because you want to go back and remember those.
Yeah,
or you'll at least wonder how old was he when he said this, or what was the first thing he said word-wise and things like that.
Yeah. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up here for episode 3. We will catch you with episode 4. Thanks for hanging in there for us, and hope you have a great rest of your day or evening.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.